Kyungju, a city that holds 1,000 years of history. The cherished values, preserved over time, have shaped who we are today. Now, through new encounters, we step into a better future. Sustainability, innovation. With the spirit of connection, a new millennium story begins. As APEC and Kyungju come together. APEC meets Kyungju.
The moment we wear it, our spirits lift. It helps us grow strong, in body and in mind. As we wear it, we learn patience and respect. The belt system motivates students to strive harder and continue growing. This uniform shapes movement into grace and turns performance into something thrilling. Now, embraced around the world, Taekwondo shares our culture, philosophy, and values with pride and spirit. Though it may seem simple, this uniform holds your passion and your journey. It belongs to Taekwondo. Wear the extraordinary. Be with Taekwondo.
President Lee Jae-myung on Tuesday ordered the relevant ministries to use all their available resources to ensure the return of South Korean nationals kidnapped in Cambodia after responding to scam job offers, following the torture and death of a South Korean college student in the Southeast Asian country. Unification Minister Chung Dong-young has hinted at the possibility of a North Korea-U.S. summit during the upcoming APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju later this month, citing the inter-Korean tourist village Panmunjeom as a potential venue. Samsung Electronics estimated its third quarter operating profit as the highest in more than 3 years, driven by a rebound in memory chip prices and increased sales of high bandwidth memory products. In addition, the country's overall ICT exports came in at a record high for the month of September. We begin with the latest on an investigation into the recent job scams in Cambodia targeting Koreans. While the government is stepping up efforts to combat the string of crimes, President Lee Jae-myung called for swift coordination with the local authorities there and tighter travel restrictions. Our President's Office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
With growing calls to tackle a recent crime surge in Cambodia targeting Koreans, President Lee Jae-myung began the weekly cabinet meeting by urging the prompt return of kidnapped Koreans who had been caught up in job scams.
국민의 생명과 안전을 지키는 것이 정부의 가장 큰 책임입니다. 지금은 다른 무엇보다 피해자들을 보호하고 또 사건 연루자들을 국내로 신속하게 송환해야 됩니다.
He called for the need to speed up establishing a coordination system with the Cambodian authorities, strengthening travel restrictions for areas of concern, and securing a sufficient budget for consular services.
가용 자원을 총동원해서 신속하게, 정확하게, 확실하게 대응해 주시기 바랍니다.
This follows an increase in reported kidnappings of Koreans by criminal rings in Cambodia through job scams, often related to voice phishing and the recent torture death of a Korean college student by a local organized crime gang.
The second vice foreign minister will lead a joint governmental response team and will be sent to Cambodia on the 15th. Also, an international cooperative body will be launched to carry out a joint police operation on the kidnapping and confinement of our people.
On the economy, President Lee urged that all hands should be on deck in the face of intensifying global trade conflict, stressing the need for gaining a technological edge and diversifying export markets. He also called for strict measures to straighten out distortions in the domestic real estate market caused by disinformation. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Also on Tuesday, President Lee called for the need to help small business owners write off heavy debts so that they can recover from the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic.
우리는 한 번 빚지면 죽을 때까지 쫓아다니잖아요. 그래서 사회적으로 사실은 바람직하지 않아요.
He was speaking at the Digital Talk Live in Seoul today, a town hall-style event where more than 100 citizens were invited. He suggested a reformist approach on financial policy, adding that there is much room for adjustment when it comes to policy measures. Noting that the businesses were affected by pandemic-era lockdowns and restrictions, the president stressed the role of the government to help those debt-ridden people. Now, on to day 2 of the National Assembly's very first audit of the Lee administration. The Unification Minister shared his views on issues regarding North Korea, including the possibility of a summit between Pyongyang and Washington. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
On the second day of the parliamentary audit of President Lee's government, Unification Minister Chung Dong-young stated that there is a possibility of a North Korea-U.S. summit on the sidelines of the upcoming APEC leaders' meeting. The remarks were made when responding to a lawmaker's question at a Foreign Affairs Committee meeting, where the minister said he strongly hopes a summit takes place and that if it does happen, it would likely take place in Panmunjeom, Truce Village in Paju City. When it comes to how Seoul will deal with Pyongyang, the minister reaffirmed the END initiative, exchange, normalization, and denuclearization that was put forward by President Lee during his address at the UN General Assembly last month. Based on this vision, Chung added that Seoul will end hostility and pursue dialogue with the North. When it comes to acknowledging South and North Korea as two separate states, the minister underlined how recognizing the two Koreas as such does not mean accepting permanent division, and rather it is the key to opening the door to unification. He added that the government is to officially confirm the idea soon. Meanwhile, Joint Chiefs of Staff was also grilled by Defense Committee lawmakers, where its chairman, General Jin Young-sing, apologized for the army having participated in former President Yoon Suk-yeol's botched martial law attempt. He mentioned North Korea's recent military parade where the regime showcased its latest Hwasong-20 intercontinental ballistic missile under development and vowed for a firm readiness posture against Pyongyang.
The Joint Chiefs of Staff are doing their utmost to establish a strong and ready military posture that can respond to any threat immediately, while also focusing all efforts on transforming into a smart elite force that can win on future battlefields.
The JCS added that it is seeking to hold a South Korea-U.S. military committee meeting attended by top military officers in Seoul early next month. These usually take place ahead of the Security Consultative Meeting, an annual meeting of the defense chiefs of the two countries. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
So the Lee administration's first National Assembly audit began on Monday, setting the stage for 3 weeks of government-wide accountability checks. The 3-week review will cover everything from judicial rulings to economic and cultural policies, with lawmakers closely questioning top officials on their decisions and performance. Our Moon Hae-ryun joins me in the studio to tell us more. Welcome back, Hae-ryun.
Good evening, Tommy.
So Hae-ryun, walk us through the whole audit process and do give us a recap on the first day yesterday.
Right, so the National Assembly is essentially a major annual review of how the government and public institutions have been performing, and relevant top officials report on and answer questions about their performance. This year's audit, starting Monday, has 17 committees reviewing over 800 government agencies and is the first under the Lee Jae-myung administration, opening with sharp clashes between the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party. At the Judiciary Committee on Monday, Supreme Court Chief Justice To Lee faced intense questioning from the DP over a ruling finding President Lee guilty of false claims during his presidential election campaign in 2022, while PPP lawmakers call the session politically motivated. Cho warns that summoning judges to testify about their rulings threatens the court's independence.
If judges are made to testify about their rulings simply because they presided over a certain case, it could discourage them from making judgments based on the Constitution, the law, and their conscience, and even lead to decisions swayed by outside pressures.
Meanwhile, economic ministries were also under scrutiny. Trade Minister Kim Jong-un warns that Korea's export dependence on a few countries leaves it vulnerable, pledging to diversify markets and boost ties with the U.S., China and Japan. Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chol said Seoul must quickly wrap up tariff talks with Washington and confirmed plans to meet with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent this week.
So, Hae-ryun, no surprise, bipartisan tensions were high yesterday. Now, what can you tell us about today's audit, on top of the audit on Unification Minister that our Bo-kyung reported in the previous report?
Right, so the second day of parliamentary audits also saw heated partisan debate in the Science, ICT, Broadcasting and Communications Committee over the fate of the Korea Communications Commission and the arrest of its former chief, Lee Jin-suk. The DP argued that abolishing the KCC, which they claimed had been used as a tool for media control by the Yoon Suk-yeol administration over the past 3 years, was only natural and called for accountability from its staff. Meanwhile, the PPP protested, saying that the creation of a new commission to replace it symbolizes the Democratic Party's parliamentary dictatorship and shows its unilateral handling of legislation. In addition, the Culture, Sports and Tourism Committee also held its audit today. Minister Choi Hee-young highlighted concerns over slowing growth in Korea's cultural industries, stressing the need for active investment.
We must develop K-culture into a future growth industry worth over 300 trillion Korean won and strengthen the cultural and artistic ecosystem that forms its foundation.
The minister also pointed to tourism and AI-driven content as key areas for policy innovation, showing that economic and cultural agendas are closely linked in these audits.
Now, Hae-ryun, that's just 2 days into the audit. So what can we expect in the weeks to come, more than 2 weeks?
Right, so the National Assembly will actually be taking its audits overseas to Cambodia. And this comes following crimes against South Korean nationals, including the kidnapping and killing of a university student by a local gang. And the Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee will conduct an on-site inspection next Wednesday. It aims to review the status of crimes targeting Koreans in Southeast Asia, with the DP and the PPP again clashing over who is to blame for the crimes. The DP says that crimes have surged over the past 2 years, while the previous embassy and foreign ministry failed to act, while the PPP argued the ambassador post was vacant at the time, blaming the current administration. And beyond the audits, the two parties have agreed to hold a plenary session on October 26th to process 70 livelihood-related bills, including measures to prevent emergency room turnaways and support childcare centres in remote areas. The session was set for a Sunday to avoid overlapping with ongoing audits, and both parties have pledged cooperation to ensure the swift passage of these pending bills.
Hae-ryun, a lot to be covered in the coming weeks. So thank you so much for coming in tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Samsung Electronics' third quarter earnings exceeded market expectations by 17%. That figure is the highest in 3 years, and analysts expect the positive trend to continue. Our Kim Do-yeon has this report.
South Korea's largest company by market cap, Samsung Electronics, has released preliminary quarterly earnings that have significantly surpassed market forecasts. The company announced on Tuesday its preliminary earnings for the third quarter of 2025, posting an operating profit of 12.1 trillion Korean won or $8.47 billion on sales of 86 trillion won or $60.23 billion. These figures represent a quarter-on-quarter increase of 158.55% for operating profit, while sales saw a jump of 15.33%. Year-on-year, the increase is 31.8% for operating profit and 8.72% for sales. The operating profit exceeded the market consensus of approximately 10 trillion won by more than 17%. The 12.1 trillion won operating profit is the company's highest since the second quarter of 2022. The 86 trillion won in sales marks a record for any quarter, and it's the first time the company's quarterly revenue has surpassed the 80 trillion won threshold. The previous record for sales was 79.1 trillion won, set in the third quarter of 2024. According to an expert, the strong performance is driven by a combination of factors, with the trend likely to continue into next year.
The improved performance is due to three things: strong sales in AI-related memory, a surge in prices for legacy products due to supply shortages, and reduced deficits in the foundry and system LSI divisions. I expect this boom to continue through the fourth quarter.
The better-than-expected performance was reflected in the company's stock price, with shares reaching a new 52-week high of 96,000 won during intraday trading on Tuesday. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And the strong performances of local semiconductors were also clearly evident in South Korea's ICT export figures last month, which turned out to be a record high as well. Our correspondent Panmunjeom has the details.
Despite uncertainties in the global trade environment, South Korea saw an all-time high performance in the ICT sector last month. According to the Ministry of Science and ICT and the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Tuesday, ICT exports for the month totaled $25.43 billion, a 14% increase from the same month last year. This resulted in a trade surplus of $11.65 billion. Outbound shipments of semiconductors, one of the country's main export engines, recorded $16.62 billion in exports. This also marked an all-time high for the second consecutive month. Exports of telecommunications equipment, which rose over 38%, and displays also contributed to this upward trend, driven by strong OLED demand. The strong performance was largely credited to the semiconductor industry thanks to higher memory chip prices amid growing demands for AI servers.
It seems the significant rise in DRAM prices played a role in this upward trend. Given the continuous strength of the semiconductor market itself, we can expect continued strong performance in Q4 as well.
Despite this upward trend, due to the tariff situation, exports to the U.S. decreased, marking it as the only region to do so, while others experienced gains. Shipments to Taiwan recorded the most significant surge, primarily fueled by a substantial rise in semiconductor exports, while other major markets, including China, Vietnam, the European Union, and Japan, also saw increased exports. Meanwhile, imports totaled $13.78 billion, resulting in a positive ICT trade balance, the second highest figure on record. Munjeom, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday touted the Gaza ceasefire deal, saying that it has opened the door to rebuilding. Now, the comments came during a summit of world leaders in Egypt as the last of the Israeli hostages were returned to their families. Our Park Kwon-woo tells us more.
U.S. President Donald Trump attended a major summit of world leaders in Egypt on Monday, where he said the Gaza ceasefire deal has opened the door to rebuilding.
And now the rebuilding begins. The rebuilding is maybe going to be the easiest part. I think we've done a lot of the hardest part because the rest comes together. We all know how to rebuild.
The comments came as Trump arrived for the high-level gathering, which brought together more than 20 heads of state. At the peace summit in Egypt, U.S. President Donald Trump, along with the leaders of Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, signed a document finalizing a peace plan for Gaza. However, with key details undisclosed and a plan not signed by Israel or Hamas, it remains limited in scope. The ceasefire agreed last week halted Israel's massive offensive on Gaza City, which had killed tens of people daily. Under the terms of the deal, Hamas released the final 20 living Israeli hostages, while Israel freed more than 1,900 Palestinian prisoners. The bodies of 28 deceased hostages were also expected to be returned as part of the deal. However, as only 4 were handed over to the Red Cross on Monday, Israel's defense minister called it a failure to meet commitments of the agreement, adding that it will be responded to accordingly. And as the second phase, including the disarmament of Hamas and withdrawal of Israel from Gaza, has yet to be agreed upon, eyes are on whether Israel and Hamas can reach a comprehensive deal while narrowing their differences and ultimately achieve lasting peace. 박건우, Arirang News.
Despite a recent and bumpy mood between the U.S. and China over trade issues, Washington is keeping its dialogue open with Beijing. The U.S. Treasury Chief says President Trump's planned meeting with China's Xi Jinping in South Korea signals easing tensions between the two sides. Our Panmunjeom has more.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says a meeting between President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea is still on track. In an interview with Fox Business on Monday, Bessent said there were substantial communications between the two sides over the weekend, adding that U.S.-China relations have substantially de-escalated. He noted that both sides will hold additional working-level meetings this week on the sidelines of the IMF and World Bank gatherings. His comments come as both countries move to cool tensions that flared after Washington announced a potential 100% tariff on Chinese imports and Beijing tightened controls on rare earth exports.
It was a miscalculation, but we are communicating now. I am confident that we can move forward.
Bessent additionally stated that President Trump has made clear the tariffs will not take effect until November 1st, signaling that the U.S. is leaving room for diplomatic progress. He sharply criticized China's export restrictions, saying they would affect the whole world and that China has pointed a bazooka at the supply chain and industrial base of the entire free world. The Treasury Chief said the U.S. is prepared to assert its sovereignty in a variety of ways, noting that Washington is already in close contact with its allies in Europe, India, and democratic nations across Asia. He expressed optimism that Beijing remains open to talks, but warned that if not, Washington holds significant leverage to respond with equally strong or stronger countermeasures. Panmunjeom, Arirang News.
It will be hard to see the blue autumn skies all week. Rain is expected to be frequent this week. In eastern parts of Gangwon-do province and east coast of Gyeongsang-buk-do province, 5 to 20 millimeters of rain will fall until tonight, and about 5 millimeters more is in southern parts of the country. The daytime temperature rose higher than yesterday. It rose to 21 degrees Celsius in Seoul, which is about 3 degrees higher than yesterday, showing typical autumn weather for this time of year. However, strong winds continue around the coastal areas of the Gyeongsang-do provinces, and a high wave advisories is also in place around the east coast. Please take extra precautions. Seoul will start off at 16 degrees tomorrow morning, Busan at 20 degrees. Highs will move up to 23 to 27 degrees across the country. Rain is back again tomorrow nationwide and will continue until Saturday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Da-mi. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
How to survive in Korea. Workplace. Step 1. Lunchtime. The most important morning routine is to check today's menu. Food is essential for survival. Memorize today's menu. The highlight of office life. Lunchtime. Rice in the bottom left, soup in the bottom right. The top is for the sides. The sauce and the spoon go here. This is the basic layout, but it's a bit odd to switch rice and soup. When you're done, pour the leftovers into the soup bowl. It doesn't look that appetizing, so wait until others are done eating. Step 2. Neng, nep, nenep. These are the most used expressions at work. Choose the most appropriate form. Neng, nep, nenep. Remember that the formal ne can sound a bit stiff. Did you just say yes? Absolutely not acceptable. You want to find the right word for the right occasion. Step 3. Desteria. Desteria is the oasis in the desert. Show them your character. If you're not the diligent type, get a stooky plant. Work is tough. Laugh and the whole world laughs with you. Weep and you weep alone. Stay put, like the stooky that survives in the desert. Hang in there until the end. Of course, you can always quit. You matter more than anything else. Step 4. Survival kit. Every worker needs a survival kit. Survival kit level 1. This position gets the most exposure. Grab one when you need a sugar boost. Always keep a few treats you can offer your co-workers. Survival kit level 2. These are for hunger pangs before and after a meal. You'll need them when you take a coffee break with your office buddies. Survival kit level 3. Trash talking your boss with your soulmate. Did you survive in the workplace? Office romance? Be careful. Even the photocopier knows all the gossip.
its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the Status UN summit.
A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang. 도시는 세계와 연결되어 문화를 창조했고 새로운 것을 받아들였다.
함께여서 우리는 더 자유롭고 더 멀리 갈 수 있어.
닫힌 문이 아니라 열린 질문으로.
나에게 에이펙은
자유,
융합,
국제성,
다양성, 포용,
개발.
신라의 정신이 에이펙 2025로 이어집니다.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. South Korea and the U.S. are locked in stalled tariff negotiations, and time is running out. At the center is Washington's demand for a $350 billion investment in exchange for lowering tariffs. But for Seoul, concerns are mounting over currency pressure, capital outflows, and political risk. With the APEC summit just days away, President Trump is holding firm, raising the question, is this really a negotiation or just leverage politics? And how should South Korea respond under such pressure? For a deeper discussion on this, we are joined by Dean Baker, senior economist at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, with insight into what Korea's next move should be. A big welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. So, Dr. Baker, let's start right away. So we're looking at a negotiation process that seems to be in a stalemate. The South Korea-U.S. tariff talks have largely stalled, and the 25% rate remains in place. How would you assess the current status? And do you think there are any realistic signs of movement behind the scenes right now?
Well, I have to say I don't have any inside sources with this administration. I have to say it's a bad time in terms of, rising to the top of the agenda here, because we've had a government shutdown since October 1st. So there's an effort, I assume there's an effort to get the government up and running, the funding for the government. I won't go into details on that, but we have a government shutdown. We also, President Trump was just in Israel and Egypt with his peace deal. Which obviously is big news for him, big news. And then on top of that, the renewed conflict with China, where President Trump was threatening 100% tariffs. He then seemed to back away from that. I don't have inside knowledge on that. Long and short, I'm just saying there's a lot of things going on here that have been very much in the news. And the agreement with South Korea is somewhat lower down in terms of its importance, or how it's perceived here, at least.
Right. So President Trump definitely seems to have a lot on his priorities right now. So leaving this latest deal to a stalemate. So let's get a little bit deeper into the core sticking point of this latest deal. So Washington's demand for a $350 billion investment package. So from your standpoint, do you think this kind of trade-off, massive capital in exchange for tariff relief, do you think it's economically sound?
I really cannot understand from South Korea's standpoint why that would make sense as an economic deal. So, I mean, just doing the arithmetic on this, Korea's exports to the United States, roughly $130 billion a year. You're not going to zero tariffs. So we're talking about 25% or 15%. So you're buying down the tariff rate at 10 percentage points. And you're paying $350 billion for that. That sounds like a really bad deal. And then on top of that, I should just point out, if it's not already clear, that Trump doesn't feel bound by his deals. So he had a whole set of deals, and then he suddenly decided that I think it was a 50% tariff on heavy trucks. Now, is he going to go through with that? I don't know. I don't think anyone does. But that would violate a lot of the agreements that he already entered into. So if South Korea actually makes some sort of hard commitment, and that's obviously a big issue, how hard is this commitment? But to invest $350 billion to some extent at Donald Trump's discretion, that seems to be like an enormous amount to pay for very, very little benefit. Now, I understand there's also security issues, and again, South Korea has to weigh those, but as an economic matter, that just seems like a horrible deal from the standpoint of South Korea.
Right, so it's definitely more than just an economic deal we're seeing. Now, speaking of the $350 billion investment of the financial side of this, so there's growing concern here that if even a portion of the $350 billion investment ends up being delivered in cash or upfront funding, it could actually drain South Korea's reserves and pressure the won further. In your view, what kind of pressure could that scenario actually place on Korea's foreign exchange market and the broader financial system as well?
Yeah, well, that is an enormous outflow of money. I mean, if you do that in 1 year, that would be, I don't see how South Korea could possibly cover that. Is that over 3 years, 5 years? It's still a very, very large outflow. So again, without some backing, some precautions, I mean, that imposes enormous risk. I mean, I don't know if you'd see a run on the currency, like, going back to the East Asian financial crisis in the 90s. I'll just say I wouldn't rule out something like that. I'm not going to predict it, but that is a huge amount of money. I mean, I recognize South Korea is a big economy. It's been very prosperous. But even for South Korea, that would be a lot of money to flow out. And again, it would just depend on the terms. But if the terms are such that, basically President Trump can dictate what comes out when, you'd be taking an enormous risk by entering into that sort of deal.
Right, exactly. So with the won already under pressure, that kind of outflow could actually really hit hard on Korea's economy. So in response to that risk, South Korea has been pushing for an unlimited currency swap agreement with Washington. But so far, there's still little progress. Do you think a swap line would meaningfully mitigate the FX pressure? And why do you think Washington is quite hesitant to move forward with one now, despite, having done in 2008 and 2020?
Yes, obviously a swap line, particularly an unlimited swap line, I'd be very surprised if you were to get the Trump administration to agree to that. But an unlimited swap line, or even a substantial swap line, even if it's not unlimited, 30, 40 billion, I'm pulling those numbers out. I'd have to think more carefully what would make sense. But that would help enormously. Obviously, an unlimited swap line, that would protect you from the sort of runs that, obviously South Korea and other countries saw back in the 90s. So that would be a great mitigating factor. Again, it may still not be a very good deal in terms of the trade deal, but in terms of the risk to the currency, that would protect South Korea. But again, I can understand from the standpoint of the United States that there'd be a reluctance, because basically it to some extent means the United States loses control of the monetary policy, its own monetary policy, so that if Korea were to need 50, 60, 70 billion on the swap line, we would be obligated to make that available. Now, again, in the context of the U.S. economy, that's not huge, but it is a factor, and I could certainly understand the reluctance of the United States and President Trump to say, okay, unlimited swap line. So I suppose if, again, Korea were to go this route, you could perhaps agree on some limited swap line, which would likely prevent the serious run on the currency. But again, I'd be very surprised if you got a commitment from President Trump for an unlimited swap line.
Right, so definitely a lot of factors weighing in. South Korea wants to reduce its risk and Washington still wants control, so we'll really have to see how that goes. So given all these, complexities, some people here in South Korea argue that, it may actually be smarter to just take the tariff hit. What about your side? Do you think absorbing the tariffs and using public funds to directly support affected exporters could be a more pragmatic path forward?
I would absolutely say, again, from an economic standpoint, I'll come back to the security issues, which I won't claim expertise on, but I'll come back to those in a second. But from an economic standpoint, you have a lot of money, in effect, to play with. So if you're talking about a $350 billion commitment, and you're looking to protect $130 billion a year in exports, which, of course, again, that's not going to go to zero. With a 25% tariff, you'll lose some, but it's not going to go to zero. And again, the alternative is you're buying it down to 15, so you're still looking at a very substantial tariff. So what I would say is Korea would be much, much better off looking to help the workers, the firms that are most affected. Unemployment compensation, again, I can't speak to the specifics of the South Korean unemployment system, but again, you have a lot of money to help unemployed workers if you're saving $350 billion on this investment commitment. So I think that would be a much better route to go. And then again, insofar as you look at the markets, as you're going to see a smaller export market there, look to get to other markets or reorient that to domestic demand. That's costly, but it costs much less than $350 billion. Now, on the security issues, again, something people have to be mindful of. I won't speak from expertise, but I could just say, we see very clearly Trump has made a big point that he's not going to be bound by prior commitments. We saw that very clearly in Ukraine, that he's sort of been saying, well, we'll see, we'll see, we'll see. He hasn't totally walked away from Ukraine, but obviously he's made a big point of saying he's not committed to Ukraine in the way that President Biden had. And again, that was bipartisan. So it wasn't that was just a Democratic commitment that had pretty much as much support from Republicans as from Democrats. But again, Trump has very deliberately said he's not bound in the same way. So I would just say when it comes to South Korea, I think it would be a mistake to assume that you had sort of a rock-hard commitment, which may have been the case with Biden, Bush, prior presidents. That's simply not the case now. So again, I understand that Korea's very real security concerns, but I don't think that it could take for granted that it has the same support from the United States under Trump as would have been true under prior presidents.
Right. So on the economic side, when we speak only economics, that could be a good option. But we are also considering security situations. So it's a very complex situation right now. Now, in light of this, we remember that in a previous interview, you've made a very interesting suggestion that South Korea should aim for a deal that is deliberately vague. What does a strategically ambiguous agreement look like in this case, Dr. Baker, and why might that be more effective under Trump?
Well, in terms of a deal that's vague, if you make a commitment where you say, okay, we're going to shoot for $350 billion, Trump's number, as long as that's not pinned down, I mean, Korea is investing in the United States, and that's fine. That's good at both sides. We know that there have been many profitable investments for Korean firms, and I expect that would continue. But if it's left more open that this will be a target, that we're going to shoot for $350 billion, but it's not a binding commitment. So there's no obligation that there's going to be $70 billion a year for the next 5 years or anything of that nature. So I think that, again, whether the Trump administration will agree to that, I have no idea. But I think that would be a better route to go because, again, it wouldn't necessarily commit Korea to doing anything that they might not do anyhow. It might not well be in its interest. So I think that would be a better route to look to go rather than locking in some sort of commitment. And again, I don't know what the repercussions would be not meeting the commitment because again, this administration has been on again, off again. So I'm not. I'm just saying I do not know how they would deal with if you made a hard commitment and then somebody didn't meet it. I don't know what the response would be. Maybe the tariffs would go back to 25%, maybe higher. I can't really say. But it's not been an administration that's made a point of consistency. I'll just put it that way.
Right. So it could sound risky, but this ambiguity could actually be a strategic move for South Korea. Now, this brings us to, the nature of our counterpart. So you've described President Trump as a transactional, unpredictable, and ultimately unconstrained by the deals he negotiates. So given that, how should Korea shape its tactics to minimize vulnerability in this unstable framework?
Yeah, I think South Korea really has to plan for an economy that is not dependent, or as dependent, I should say, on U.S. trade. So again, not going to zero. I don't think there's a plausible story where it's going to go to zero, but to look to increase trade with other trading partners, obviously Japan, China, to my view, again, I don't know all the intricacies of Korea's involvement with China. I recognize there are issues between Korea and China, but that's the major economic power out there, major economic power in the world, really. But that having closer relations with China probably would be beneficial. And then, of course, the European Union, as well as developing countries in Latin America and Africa. So I think looking as much as possible to expand into other markets, I think, is the most feasible path going forward. And again, if you're looking to be able to have some degree of certainty, what will things look like 2, 3, 4 years out? I think almost certainly you're talking about countries other than the United States, at least as long as Donald Trump's in the White House.
Right, so reducing too much dependence on Washington could be a helpful move. Now let's zoom out a little bit. So Korea is not really alone in this tariff deals. So with the EU doubling steel tariffs and China tightening its export rules, do you think we're entering a new phase of global protectionism? And how should export-reliant economies recalibrate their long-term trade strategy right now?
Yeah, it has been disconcerting. I mean, I'm just speaking myself personally, my views. I wasn't one of the people who said, oh, free markets everywhere always, are the best outcomes. But we've definitely stepped away from that, we meaning basically the whole world. But I'm hoping, and again, I can't say this will necessarily be the case, that you'll see some consolidation with kind of the rest of the world, excluding the United States. So even though there might be more protectionist measures, I think pretty much everyone else recognizes the advantage of certainty. So one of the points, and this has been interesting because a lot of us meaning economists in the United States, we've been saying, well, tariffs are bad, tariffs are bad, tariffs are bad. But the worst thing about tariffs isn't the tariff itself. It's the uncertainty and then, of course, the corruption. So if you locked in a tariff, the United States, let's say we locked in 15% tariffs, again, not my recommended policy, but let's say we did that. That wouldn't be a disaster. It wouldn't be that different than, say, the dollar fell by 15% against the other currencies in the world. It'd basically be that same story. So the tariff itself isn't a disaster. What's real problem is when they're constantly changing. And then, of course, also where you do have corruption, where you have favored companies, individuals that make arrangements, deals, bribes, whatever you want to call them. That's the big problem. So I think the rest of the world recognizes that even if you have tariffs for certain industries, that is something that they and the world could live with. The problem is that they're not locked in, that they change all the time. So I think with that recognition, Korea, the European Union, and for that matter, China, I think it's possible to move forward. Not that you'll have deals, everyone's going to be totally happy, but the big point is that you'll have things locked in so that they're not changing all the time, and that could be a basis for planning.
Right, so we should really work to make a predictable, not too unstable deals moving forward. But looking ahead to the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju, South Korea, just days to go, and both sides, Washington and Seoul, are under pressure to show some movement. Do you think we can realistically expect any meaningful outcome from the leaders meeting?
Well, again, the United States is going to be focused first and foremost on China. And again, I have no inside knowledge, but that's kind of blown up. So what's happened, again, what's public, if there are other things private, I can't speak to those. But what's been public is, China put in new restraints on exports of rare earths, which are needed for our economy. They're very essential. And in response, Trump threatened 100% tariffs. Again, one of the unusual things the way the Trump administration conducts its policies, this is all out in the open. So it makes it harder to move back from positions. So again, I suspect, I anticipate that Trump will try to arrange a deal. I'm not 100% sure it'll be at APEC, of course, but it's the 100% tariffs on Chinese goods would be a disaster for the United States. China, I'm sure, won't like it, but it would be a much bigger problem for the United States because that's close to an embargo of Chinese goods, which we need. I mean, over time, we can move away from them. We can't move away from them next month. So I'm assuming they'll look for a deal. I don't know if that'll occur at APEC. Now, so in terms of Korea, I think, again, unfortunately for Korea, I think that's going to be a back burner issue for the Trump administration. My guess is that they might look to have something to say, even if it's not substantive, to say we've made progress, et cetera, et cetera. But I wouldn't necessarily expect a worked out deal at the summit.
We'll really have to see, and the world will be definitely keeping close eyes on the latest developments. Now, Dr. Baker, finally, before we let you go, could you offer just one single piece of advice to South Korea's leadership at this stage? What could they focus on the most, both in their immediate next steps and in their broader strategic posture going forward?
Well, again, I'd say you have to realize who you're dealing with. Donald Trump likes to boast of things, even if there's no substance. He's been going around boasting that he has brought $18 trillion into the United States. Now, people may not be familiar with the U.S. economy. It's a large economy. That's an absurd number. I mean, if he brought in 1/10 that amount, it would be a lot. But he's saying that there's literally nothing to back that up. My reason for mentioning that is he likes to be able to boast about things. And he doesn't necessarily care if they correspond to anything that exists in the world. So if the Korean government can give him something to boast about that might not have, I was saying before, a $350 billion commitment that's not kind of really substantive. If you made it $500 billion, but it's not really substantive, made it $1 trillion, but it's not really substantive. He could boast about that, and that is what he cares about. That might sound crazy. I mean, the president of, the world's leading superpower, that may seem crazy, but, for better or worse, I think that's the reality.
Right, so a very strategic and powerful message to end our discussion tonight. Dr. Baker, thank you so much for your insights and making time for us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for having me on. I enjoyed it.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.